Hello everybody and welcome to my review of volume number 1 of Eiji Mikage's light novel series, The Empty Box and Zeroth Maria. Now, this one is released in English by Yen On. If you want to pick up your own copy, I do have links to Amazon.com for US shoppers or the Book Depository if you want to shop internationally, as they will ship all over the world. This one came out in Japan. The series started in September of 2009, and the series is finished in Japan. Volume number 7, the final book in the series, came out in 2015. So this book is told in the first-person point of view from main character Kazuki Hoshino's point of view. Kazuki is an average kid who values his relatively normal life, but on March 2nd, a new transfer student arrives in his class. She introduces herself as Aya Otanashi, and she makes it sound like she's met Kazuki thousands of times. In fact, she has transferred to this classroom thousands of times. And she basically accuses Kazuki of a crime that he has no idea what it is, and says that it is her mission to break him. Now, if you're familiar at all with the movie Groundhog Day, or even the light novel All You Need Is Kill, you'll be pretty familiar with the mechanic that is at the center point of The Empty Box and the Zeroth Maria, which is this whole idea of characters being stuck in a time loop that constantly repeats. Now, it's really not a spoiler to tell you that, because if you haven't figured it out within the first 5 pages, well, I'm a little concerned for you, because the book really makes it quite obvious what's happening right away. Because it is not this mechanic that is the point of the book, or the selling point of the book. In fact, one of the things that I found really interesting about this book, and that just really drew me in and made me buy into this whole repetition mechanic right away, is that it actually numbers the number of repetitions. That's one of the things that I find people will look at, say, like All You Need Is Kill or Groundhog Day is famous for this, that people have spent considerable amounts of time trying to figure out just how long a particular individual was stuck in a loop. And this one comes right out and it's like, yep, here is loop number blah blah blah, here is loop number blah blah blah. And one of the reasons that it does that, and that makes it a really engaging read, and that really had me excited as I was going through it, is that it's not linear. So you'll read about a couple of different times, and like, let's say, just for instance, okay, it's loop number 5,000. Well, you'll read about part of loop of 5,000, but then the next thing will be about something that happened in loop 3,000. And then it'll jump to like loop 11,000, and then back to loop 2,000. And so it does a little bit of this jumping around, and I mean, to say that makes it sound almost a little intimidating maybe, I don't know, but it really isn't, and it really works very, very effectively. And what of course becomes interesting in that is that if you're used to this mechanic, you know that characters begin to sort of change, and there's slight alterations to things and sequences as each subsequent loop occurs. It's kind of cool to have something happen in a later loop, and then we get sort of the backstory of that, because it happened, sort of the butterfly effect of that, the small change that kind of created all that eventually came to pass in that loop. We go back and sort of see how that happened before. So it's not the same in terms of like how it uses the mechanic is different. Like I said, almost every other time I have seen this used, and of course, I have not read everything that's ever used this, but pretty much every time I've seen it used, whether it be in television, whether it be in All You Need Is Kill, Groundhog Day, what have you, it's always linear. So we see what happens loop 1, we see what happens loop 2, loop 3, and so forth until we come to the end of the movie, or whatever the particular story is. In this one, because it keeps sort of jumping around a little bit, I found that it kept me on my toes. Like, it made me really kind of excited for things, because I didn't really always, it wasn't like I was like, okay, well, okay, this happened, and now they're going to wake up and we're going to go through this day all over again. No, because it jumps around, it doesn't always show you an entire part of the loop. Like, it'll only show you the part of the loop that matters. So in that way, we get through all these different loops and we see sort of significant events from different loops, but you don't feel bogged down because you're not constantly reading the repetitions like, oh, I woke up and, oh, look, it's the alarm clock. And, oh, then somebody came in the room and said, wow, are you awake yet? Like, sometimes when you read these kind of stories or see these kind of stories, that'll happen 6 or 7 times and you're kind of like, okay, I'm over it now. And that doesn't happen in this book. So the pacing is really, really good in that respect. It doesn't feel, even though it is a looped type storyline, you never feel like you're bogged down in these constantly repetitive type ideas, because the book is only really interested in showing you what's different with each loop or how each loop impacts, future loops. So it'll only show you just that little bit that happened. The other thing about this is that it's very much a mystery type of story. So if we're taking a look at, say, like Groundhog Day, and I mean, I use that because it's probably the most famous example. When you take a look at Groundhog Day, the whole question of why did the loop happen? It's not really addressed. It's more like, how do I escape? That's always an element, right? How do I escape? And that plays into this as well. But a lot of the how do I escape in this one plays into the idea of, why is there a loop? Who is behind the loop? What are their intentions? Why did they even create the loop? Like, there's this huge sort of mystery element to it as well. And there's, of course, a little bit of horror aspects to it too, because it's a loop. Like, yeah, people can die in a grisly way, and, it doesn't really matter because they'll be back tomorrow. So you have sort of these slight horror elements. You have this mystery element. Then you have this whole looping element, and you're constantly saying to yourself, like, what will Kazuki remember in the next loop? Or what will he forget? Or how will he remember? And it's constantly playing with all of these things, and there's a lot of like bait and switch in this book. So when you think that something is happening the way that your mind says it is, you find out that you're reading it, you've been tricked. Very shortly after, you'll read and you'll realize, I made assumptions that misled me. So again, it's another, I mean, obviously we see these things in mysteries too, right? But it really effectively used that whole bait and switch thing a number of times, where I thought for sure, okay, now this is throwing me for a loop because I have no idea what's happening. And then I would move further on in the book and I'd be like, oh, I see what you did there. And I mean, there was even times where I found myself like grabbing the book and kind of flipping back and going, what loop number was this again? And then I would flip back and I'd read something, and then I'd be like, but I thought for sure. And then I'd flip back and I'd reread the section that had led me to believe a certain thing. And then I'd be like, oh, I see what kind of language he used to trick me up and make me assume something, but yet lead me down a completely different path. Like, there's a lot of really good writing in this book. And for me, I mean, I think this is like light novel number 69 that I'm reading this year or something. And this felt fresh. It felt different. It didn't feel like most other light novels that I've read. Yes, you can cherry pick certain components out of it. There were certain themes of this whole idea of like masks and feeling so broken inside, but hiding it. And we've seen those themes play out. Like one of the books that I thought that played out really, really well in was the first volume of Book Girl, which is an older series that I've reviewed the first volume of, and I've got 2 more volumes on my shelf because I was so impressed with that book. So there are these themes of a person and what kind of masks they put on. I liked the fact that this book took a rather harsh view at the idea of what would this constant repetition do to a person. It actually does take into account the idea of what kind of damage would it do to your psyche if you were going through these loops and remembered them. So there's a lot of really good material in this book. I I could not put this down. I tweeted out on, the other night, on Thursday night, I was reading it. I was about halfway through, and it was like after midnight. I had to be up at 5:30 to go to work, and I was like, I wish I didn't have to go to work tomorrow just so I could keep reading this until it's done. Like, I did not want to put it down. It just really grabbed me. Like I said, I think it's the pacing of it. I think it's the mind games that it slightly plays with you. There's the whole bait and switches like I talked about. There's just a lot of really good stuff in this book. And the characters are likable enough. I kind of liked, like with Kazuki, he comes across initially as a very vanilla type character, but as he progresses through the book, he definitely changes and grows and has to make decisions that aren't really easy. In fact, they're very, very difficult. And I liked that he didn't try to look away from those decisions, and that he faced those decisions in a lot of cases head on. So it made me really interested and invested in the character. And Aya Otanashi, fantastic female character, very strong, very determined. I'm very, very interested in more of her backstory. I'm hoping that we get more of it. So all in all, I loved this book. I said when I announced that I was going to be reading this one, I was like, there's so much hype about this series. So many people talking about how good this series is. And I was really afraid that it wouldn't live up to that hype. And I would say in a lot of ways it surpassed it for me. And not because people don't hype it up enough, but I think just because I was becoming skeptical, because I was like, this really can't be as good as people say. And when it was, I was like, wow, this is like, it was just so cool to me. Like, I guess it just, like I said, the experience of reading this is not like so many other light novels. And so it just feels very, very different. And again, I'm not saying this is the only light novel that is like this. I'm just saying that we have not had a lot of light novels like this in English. And this is why I'm increasingly excited about the state of official translations that we're getting in English, because we are increasingly getting titles that are varied and different and offer a whole different kind of reading experience. And this one definitely delivered on what I wanted it to. I have to say that even though a part of me has an idea of how this will continue, I found this volume really, really satisfying. Like, if this had been a standalone single volume, I probably wouldn't have been horribly disappointed. But at the same token, I'm actually really, really glad there's more of it because I liked it so much. I've heard from a few of you that volume 2 is probably the weaker of the chain, which, I mean, I guess it kind of makes sense, but many of you have said that it gets even better than this volume onward from there, from like volumes 3 to 7. So, man, I know it's going to take at least a year and a half. Probably at least a year and a half, 2 years maybe, because they'll probably do 3 a year, if we're lucky at least, to get through this series, but definitely you can hang in there and know that I will review every single volume of this series because, man, I'm sold. Totally sold. Loved this volume and very much looking forward to volume number 2. So those are my incredibly enthusiastic thoughts on volume number 1 of The Empty Box and Zeroth Maria. I'm sure there's criticisms of this book that I am missing out on, but I just enjoyed myself so much that I just probably glazed over them because really it was such a strong novel. My next review is going to be a J Novel Club title because I was kind of realizing like I'm getting behind on a lot of their titles and haven't been reviewing them as much. I've been reviewing a lot more physical type books. So my next review is going to be volume number 3 of Ari Ferretta, From Commonplace to World's Strongest. So volume number 3 of the sort of dungeon diving OP main character type series will be my next review. So if you love light novels and you're new to the channel, you should consider subscribing. I do 2 to 3 reviews every single week, as well as a weekly countdown of the top 10 best-selling light novels in Japan. Thank you very much for joining me in this video, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Till then, bye-bye for now.